this is the life of a black person in America. We're automatically assumed to be a threat. And we have to work hard to overcome that initial perception. Not just with cops, but with you too. Recently, we've seen a wave of video footage of cops being called on African Americans just for living their own lives. From playing music, to barbecuing at a park, to moving out of an Airbnb, or just jogging in a white neighborhood. As black people, we're often the subjects of 911 calls for things you, my white friends, take for granted. We're expected to prove that we belong in areas whereas you are given the benefit of the doubt. We're expected to subjugate ourselves to some white Americans as if you're the legitimate extensions of law enforcement. And if we're unwilling to comply, you unholster the police like a semi-automatic rifle, and we run the risk of losing our lives. In the past, those 911 calls were typically anonymous, but now they're overt. White America has weaponized the police against us. I personally had the cops called on me for mundane activities. Here's the thing. There's been a long history of white Americans weaponizing the police against blacks. We can easily go back to Emmett Till as an example. White women in particular are cleanly aware of how to leverage historical racial tropes in order to showcase their power over the police and their dominance over us. They play the role of the fragile white woman against the big, aggressive black man.
Would you please stop? Sir, I'm asking you to stop.
Please don't come close to me.
Sir, I'm asking you to stop recording me.
Please don't come close to me.
Please take your phone off.
Please don't come close to
And
me.
I'm taking a picture and calling the cops.
Please call the cops. Please call the cops.
I'm going to tell them there's an African-American man threatening my life.
Please tell them whatever you like.
Excuse me? I'm sorry, I'm in the ramble, and there is a man, African-American, who is a bicycle helmet. He is recording me and threatening me and my dog. There is an African-American man, I am in Central Park. He is recording me and threatening myself and my dog. And my... I'm sorry, I can't hear you either. I'm being threatened by a man in the ramble. Please send the cops immediately. I'm in Central Park in the ramble. I don't know.
Thank you.
As young kids, we're taught to play the game. The game is, how to navigate white America. Those who are successful at the game know how to speak the King's English. They know how to comment on topics that make us less threatening to white America. The stock market, the arts, the latest pop music hit. We're taught to be uncomfortable, or be comfortable, I should say, being the only minority in the room. And be comfortable having to represent that minority. And every single action that you take is a reflection of that minority. We're taught that we have to work 110% harder than you just to receive 80% of the credit. We know that we're not going to be rewarded simply because of our merits. We know we have to find inroads into establishing personal connections with you to show that we're one of the gang, one of the good ones. We know all about your culture. But ask yourself, what do you know about ours? We are a proud people, but there is only so much we can take. Yes, Jim Crow may be gone, but his shadow continues to blanket America. Do you remember Rodney King? In the 90s, he was beaten within an inch of his life by 4 white cops. And it was recorded. And Black America said, you know what? Finally, white America will be able to see what we have been enduring for decades. And that they are going to be just as appalled as the blacks about what we have to deal with when we see law enforcement. Over-policing and brutality. We had hopes that we were going to finally see some justice. But those cops were acquitted. And we rioted. And at the conclusion of those riots, we were promised reforms. We were told that the laws and policies would change to prevent this from happening ever again. And in the last 30 years, how much has really changed? We are still seeing the same levels of brutality and racism. The only difference is that it's being recorded and broadcasted more often. And if you're being honest with yourself, my white friends, many of you are becoming numb to seeing it. Yet despite those recordings, police are still given the benefit of the doubt in the judicial system. We often hear that they're not guilty because it was a split-second decision and the officer feared for his or her life. Yet, when investigated, no weapon was ever found. We often hear that the black male was aggressive towards him, which is a coded word, by the way, aggressive. Yet, the suspect is shot in the back. But what really puzzles me is that how is it that confirmed white mass murderers like Dylan Roof or James Holmes or recently Peter Manfredonia are taken into custody peacefully? But in the case of George Floyd, there wasn't a split-second decision to be made. And by all video accounts, there was no aggression. He wasn't suspected of a violent crime. He was suspected of writing a bad check. And for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, he lay on the asphalt, pleading for his life. While multiple officers who are tasked to protect and serve lay their body weight on his neck and his back. And for over 2 minutes of those torturous 8 minutes and 46 seconds, George lay motionless. He was either dead or dying. And he called out for his mother.
Get in the car.
Mama!
Get up and get in the car right.
I can't.
And that wasn't even enough.
You can't win.
My knee.
The stop.
You can't win, man.
I'm through.
I know you were never. You didn't listen.
That's the stomach. My stomach hurts. My neck hurts. Everything hurts. Just water.
Yet one out of the 4 cops are in custody. And it took them multiple days to get that one arrest. As white Americans, you have the privilege to turn a blind eye to these types of injustices because they don't happen to you. And while this doesn't happen to you, I'm asking you to be just as outraged as if it could. We don't know what contributions to a society Tamir or Trayvon or Michael or George could have given, and sadly, we will never know. So my white friends, I know that you're dismayed about the riots around the country, but I need you to focus that outrage on what caused the riots, not the riots themselves. George Floyd was not the first. And sadly, he's not going to be the last to die because of implicit racial bias and overt racism. And as a Black American, I live in fear daily about potential interactions with cops and white Americans in general. If I get stopped, will I get a respectful cop? Or is it my turn to die? How much of a threat will I be perceived as today? What vernacular should I use, and how should I minimize my threat perception? How do I respond without sounding like a stereotypical angry Black man and further stigmatize my race? This is my reality. This is the reality that I and many Black Americans face daily, regardless of station. I've had the talk when I was younger, and I dread the day when I have to have that talk with my son and daughter. But I must, because I have to save their lives.